Okay, welcome back everyone from the lunch break. I hope you all came back well fed and ready to cook with gas, as we say in the US. We're going to move on to our second keynote speech today, which is really concerning the infrastructure behind all of this. We've talked a lot about the role of LPG in terms of policy in our morning panel. Just to recap that, one of the big themes for that morning panel was how LPG can tell its story, how it can explain its relevance to people in their daily lives. And of course, one very notable aspect of that story is air pollution and its comparative advantage over other fuels. So we're going to move on to our second keynote address now. We are very privileged to be joined by Allard Castelein, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Port Authority of Rotterdam. Rotterdam is Europe's largest port, so he is going to have a lot of interesting things to say, I imagine. So Allard, welcome up to the podium. He is going to start with what I saw a little bit of before. It's a very exciting video.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having me here. Thank you for returning from your lunch, and hope you have enjoyed the day so far and that the rest of the event will be to your expectations. Let me start with a brief video depicting what the Port of Rotterdam is all about. That was it. Everything you always wanted to know about the port. So if you look at these numbers, you might be inclined to think that's a pretty solid business. There's market leadership across a number of segments. And is this a, if you like, a forecast for the future, and will the future be like the history has proven to be? We tend to think that's not the case. We tend to think that's premised on the mere fact that we see two huge disruptions related to the ports business. And those two disruptions are basically digitization and energy transition. And let me try in this brief address, because I can talk about the port and the various segments for hours, but let me try and explain to you why we think that's the case and what we are about to do about that. First of all, digitization. When I started in my current role, after more than 26 years with Shell, in various countries, in various capacities, one of my first observations was, where are the Airbnb or the Ubers or the Google Maps of this world in the cargo transportation sector? And basically, we were just on the brink of new developments, new technologies, new players. And as a port, we decided to take our future destiny in our own hands, and we began to create, and we have a full-fledged international team developing the various business propositions as we speak. For instance, to develop a route planner. And you might argue or think, well, from a private and even in your line of field business perspective, that is a traditional means or application. But in cargo goods, in particular deep sea, there wasn't such a thing. So we've developed a feature called Navigate, connecting 550 ports across the globe, showing how a forwarder from Shanghai could get its products south of Munich in the most efficient way, the cheapest way, and also with the lowest carbon footprint. That's one example. Another example is that we're the first port on this planet that is currently developing, in partnership with Esri, IBM, Apple, and Cisco, a digital twin of our port. Now you may think, what's a digital twin? What is that supposed to mean, and what are you going to do with it? But basically, this is anticipating that we are approaching an era where automated shipping is likely to be around the corner. Because if we read in the papers the struggles and trials and tribulations related to automated driving, why would automated shipping be so difficult if we also realize that we are quite comfortable flying a 747 in or out of Amsterdam completely on autopilot? I fly a lot, offset my footprint, by the way, but I'm more comfortable in a deep fog type of environment that the captain tells me that the autopilot is switched on than that I have to rely on the human capacity thereof. So we are developing a smart port. Now, one of the features of a smart port is, for instance, if you take the logistics value chain with regards to a vessel calling on the port and leaving the port, there's easily 10 steps in between. A vessel needs a pilot, it needs a tugboat, it needs a boatsman to connect it to the quay wall, it needs to load cargo, unload cargo, take in some waters, get in some bunker supplies, exchange some crew, certainly papers, and some other amenities, and then it will sail off again. So 10, 20 steps in between such a journey, just inside the port. Through the digital application of the various sources of information, including salinity, which affects buoyancy of a ship, draft, currents, tides, and provide that information online real-time to the shipping lines, we've managed to reduce the time in port, or coming into and leaving a port, by 20%. That's a lot, 20%, in today's day and age, 2019. Translate the 20% to value, it's not a 20% of CO2 emissions, it's actually 20% that equates to, and this is quote unquote by Maersk, by Shell, by MSC, who were our partners in this pilot process, to 60,000 euros per call to the port. Now, we receive 120,000 to 140,000 vessels per annum. So just do the maths, do the sums. That's a significant value saved by weaving out inefficiencies that are, in my book, not sustainable because they're inefficient. It's not only that they're inefficient and not sustainable because they emit more, but anything that is a non-optimal efficient supply chain is, I believe, not sustainable. So we invest as a port significantly in providing digital means and applications and services to our customers in order to attract more business to the port and make it therefore of competitive advantage compared to our other ports in the Northwest European arena. But there's more to the challenges, because I alluded to the fact there's digitization and energy transition. And if I look at energy transition, just bear with me while I build up this picture, and then look at the 16% in the corner. That is the percentage of CO2 emitted in Rotterdam as part of the total Dutch emission profile. Now, if you bear in mind that the Dutch government, and not only this past couple of days in New York, but some 1.5 years ago already pledged that they would wish to reduce the emission profile to 49% compared to 1990 in 2030, going into a fully neutral position in 2050, then if the port's business is thus carbon heavy and so accountable for such a significant emission profile, then it's clear that the country will never be able to achieve the target emission reductions if we not deliver on it. So we've set out to not only identify this as a disruption and a challenge, but actually consider it an opportunity. And that may sound weird if 50% of your profile is carbon-based, which I genuinely believe that if we embrace this as an opportunity, we will be able to create business opportunities for the businesses that wish to deliver on the Paris Climate Agreement themselves. So already in 2016, delivered a report in 2017, we identified that there's UN reports that stipulate that investing in renewable energy has a return which is appealing. There's pretty much for every country present in this room a McKinsey report that will identify that at a country level, such investments are to the benefit of society. We decided to look specifically at the value streams and the supply, demand, and future need of the various products that are produced by the manufacturing facilities that we host in the port area. And we delivered a report in 2017, co-created with the Wuppertal Institute, who've done the same for the Ruhrgebiet in Germany, which means which pathways we should identify and thus pursue in order to get to a reduction of 49% in 2030, up to 100% reduction in 2050. That was followed by a second report from the same institute, given our experience with them, to identify the impact of the logistics value chain, from deep sea to rail and or inland shipping and or road, all the way to into our supply envelope. And for those of you not too familiar with port industry business, and I don't blame you for it, the Port of Rotterdam is by far the largest port in Europe, twice the size Antwerp, 3 times the size Hamburg, and that's not because we supply just merely 18 million Dutchmen. We have a supply envelope of some 350 million people, all the way into northern Italy, Switzerland, Poland, well into southern Germany, obviously, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, etc. So we looked at our supply envelope, we looked at what is the emission profile of the transportation coming into the port and subsequently the ongoing movement of the various goods from the port to the hinterland, so to speak. So those 2 reports have allowed us, and that's what we subsequently set out to achieve, a very detailed program which we co-created with academia, the businesses, but also with the NGOs and the policymakers towards various pathways which we call in 3 steps to carbon neutral, regarding the full value chain and the full business profile as a port we constitute. So that's how it looks like. And you see step 1 to 3, and you see a now and a coming soon. And basically what we've done and identified is say, well, if you wish to achieve the reduction you aspire to, you have to start with those elements that you're familiar with, that you're aware of, that you can execute, of which the technology is proven. It's no use knowing that you need to achieve 49% reduction in 2030 to sit back behind a spreadsheet and or await the results from a particular laboratory test and environment. You need to build, you need to execute as we speak. So initially, we will start focusing on a huge increase in efficiency by using residual heat, by carbon capture and storage, by using each other's steam processes. The second step that we're taking in parallel, this is not a series, right? This is a parallel development. The second step that we're exploring is to move to a new energy system. Once again, these manufacturing processes often require high temperatures. There's a hope that in future high temperature processes can actually be executed through using hydrogen and or electrification. Not proven yet anywhere in the world, but that's the hope. So we should now already have the test facilities for that second step. And the third step, of course, is to change your entire supply chain and raw material chain to get to fully circular processes and or synthetic fuels in order to have a zero emission profile. Now, why is this relevant? Well, next to the numbers you've seen regarding the port, there's some 3,000 companies that have a presence in the port area. Our port area is some 12,000 hectares, generating 385,000 jobs, 6.2% of the GDP in the country. So these are big numbers. The beauty is that although it's 12,000 hectares, which might sound like a sizable area, from a business perspective, it's actually relatively manageable. And within that area, we have the likes of Exxon, BP, Huntsman, Lyondell, Air Products, Air Liquide, Shell, and the like. And the good thing is that those companies have signed up to the Paris Climate Agreement. So for me, as a business, it's much more relevant that ExxonMobil has underwritten the Paris Climate Agreement and wishes to deliver on the targets and the challenges than, with due respect, that President Trump is in agreement, because Exxon needs to invest, and that won't be the government of the United States. So what we try to do, knowing this challenge and knowing these aspirational goals, is to take away some of the key concerns that might emerge if you create a point-to-point solution. And with that I mean, given the challenges, the solutions will be, from my point of view, through the creation of a coalition of the willing. And that's not one mother of all coalitions of the willing, but it's a coalition of the willing which is fit for purpose. Could be a coalition of the willing related to waste to chemicals, and I'll get back to that in a second. It could be related to using residual steam or residual heat, or it could be with regards to an overall investment in infrastructure, rather than point-to-point solutions. And I think that's where we differentiate ourselves significantly from many other areas and or businesses as standalone enterprises. We've identified that because we are crossing boundaries, we're crossing value chains, we're crossing earning models, we're crossing capacities, capabilities, allocation of capital and all that stuff, that we as a port company, so to speak, we could be the facilitator, we could be the initiator, we could be the investor, we could be the co-creator, we could be calling upon the various head offices. So I travel the world to visit with the CEOs of Exxon and BP and Shell and the like, and rather than meeting with them in their offices, painting the picture of the world, and in particular of the Netherlands, and then subsequently asking him or her or them how they will reduce their profile of emissions, and asking when they will switch off the lights, which is often the response, right? If you ask NGOs what should happen to the refineries in a port area, they would say, close, stop, wrong, don't bother, don't invest. So that's often what they're confronted with, whereas my approach to them is actually one of saying, what can I do to ensure that you will be able to run the most efficient refinery in the world with the lowest emission profile in the world? And how can I help you achieve a zero emission profile by 2050? What can I do to leverage your presence in the port? What is my role in linking up your challenges to the challenges of your neighbor or to your partner or to your competitor, taking away the competitive nature of such a debate? So we have various NDAs, we have various one-to-one agreements, but collectively we bring it together in order to have a optimal infrastructure, optimal business solutions. And let me give you one example which is not on the slides, but we all know about plastic waste. We know what a challenge that is. So let's have an hypothesis that in Northwest Europe there's a liquid market, so not a long-term contracted, defined value chain. There's a liquid market of anywhere between 7 and 9 million tons of waste plastic, of which a large chunk goes into incineration, which I think we would all recognize as not the most sustainable circular solution to the world, right? So one of the roles that we are now currently taking, and we have the next first meeting scheduled for within 4 weeks, I've approached big waste companies, and I've said, would you be interested to play a role in possibly bringing into Rotterdam some 7 to 9 million tons of waste that goes into incineration? And I've, at the same time, approached the big chemical facilities, Shell, Dow, BASF, DSM, Nourion. Said, would you be interested to have a consistent supply of 7 to 9 million tons of plastic waste and team up, create a coalition with your competitors potentially, but on this occasion your partners, and build the biggest bloody syngas facility in the world you can possibly imagine in the port area? And would you subsequently be interested into offtake your share, your equity share of the output, and have a bio-circular product which you can then use in your value chain again? And those are the kind of initiatives that we're deploying, which fit in this 3 steps to neutral kind of game, which is a long-term game with many players taking many steps over a very, very long period of time. Because there's no silver bullet. Let there not be no mistake about. There's not a silver bullet. But those are the kind of roles we play, the initiatives we take, the projects that we have. And this is a shorthand, a summary, if you'd like, of the various projects that we currently run. But within the company, we now have a portfolio of opportunities of close to 60 projects, which, if I add them all up, could deliver some 40% of the total Dutch emission reduction target, not only our equity share, if you'd like, which would be far, far less, because we only have 16%, but we could deliver 40% of the emission challenge provided we can make these things work, and provided we have a government that supports the endeavors that we are about to address. Some examples, which I think will bring it a bit to life, perhaps, which is possibly interesting to consider, because this is not paper exercise, this is not analyses, these are not beautiful ideas by possibly some people much smarter than I am. This is in progress, work in progress. It's live, it's live and kicking, and we have these press clippings, we have these acknowledgements, we have this awareness that various of these projects are not only on the drawing board, but some are in an execution stage already, which sets us apart, I think, again, from many of the other initiatives that you might be reading about. For instance, carbon capture and storage. I don't know whether you're anywhere near familiar with carbon capture and storage, but let me say a couple of words about it, because it tends to be quite contentious for those that are aware. And the contentiousness sits with the fact that there's NGOs, but it's probably only 1%, but there's NGOs, but probably only 1% of the global NGO community that might think that carbon capture and storage is a prolongation, an extension of a contract to trash. Our belief, my belief, and the belief of the Stockholm Resilience Institute, or the UN, or the World Economic Forum, or you name it, is that carbon capture and storage is essential if we wish to stand any chance whatsoever as a society to stay within the 1.5 degree target. And let's be clear, the 1.5 degree target translates to, in 2050, you should be carbon neutral. Paris Agreement did not stipulate one should be carbon neutral in 2050. This is calculating back with the information present at that point in time. Earlier this week, a new report was published, and it may very well be that the implication of that report will be that we need to be carbon neutral before 2050, maybe even 2045 or 2040, which I'm not excluding, but setting aside that particular challenge. On this one, there's some a little more than 10 projects around the world that feature carbon capture and storage. Basically, this is a manufacturing process. CO2 is emitted, it's captured, it's subsequently moved via solid infrastructure, pipeline usually into an empty salt cavern or depleted gas or oil field. These tend to be point-to-point solutions. What we're offering the entire industrial complex in Rotterdam is we will invest in the common infrastructure, the common carrier structure, and all we do, refineries, manufacturing plants, petrochemical facilities, all we do is ask you to deliver your CO2 at the fence. Deliver it at the fence, and we will take away your concerns. We'll move it, non-discriminatory, open access, relatively modest return, and more importantly than anything else, we'll also take the ownership of the molecule off your books. So we believe, and that's at least the feedback from the emitters, it's a pretty compelling proposition. And we are currently developing this project. I actually had a shareholders meeting early this morning in Utrecht. And the intent is to create a storage facility with a capacity of some 10 megatons per annum, which is bigger than anything else around the globe. 10 megatons per annum. And we will store the CO2 in a depleted gas field offshore. Now, we're blessed as a country to have all these facilities offshore, because I myself have been involved in onshore storage somewhat like a decade ago, and believe you me, I still have the scars on my back because there was not a consensus, not an acceptance, not a license to operate to execute such plans in populated areas, whereas we believe it can be executed safely. So this is one real project with funding, with support from the European Union, even to the extent that the European Union have embraced this as their flagship project in order to meet the Paris agreements. Because from this project, this should be copied left, right, and center by many other countries. And I've offered our proposition already to our neighbors in Belgium, and I've offered our proposition already to our neighbors in Germany, and we're sharing our information with our close neighbors almost in Norway. So this is a pan-European solution, but the knowledge and the experience should subsequently be shared with many of the countries possibly present in this room. Another very specific project is a waste-to-chemistry facility. I talked about the plastic waste. This is a more diverse even project that we're involved in, and this is a beautiful example of what I earlier referred to, the role that we wish to play as a company. Because traditionally, ladies and gentlemen, our role used to be to ensure safe traffic management and exploration of the various territories that we kind of own in the port area, these 12,000 hectares. On this one, we are actually a co-investor. We will be investing together with Nourion, the former AkzoNobel, Enerchem, which is a Canadian company that owns the technology license, but also with Air Liquide and Shell, who've co-invested in this venture, and we're the fifth partner with equity. This is a waste-to-chemical facility that will use residual waste, again with its sole current destination of incineration, to convert that waste to biomethanol. Shell is a strong believer in the technology, Nourion is a strong believer in the technology, and we hope to be able to take a financial investment decision in approximately a year or a little less than that. It will be a first of its kind world-scale facility. The reason we've decided to invest in it is because we want to kickstart the circular economy, and that's in this 3 steps to neutral, where step 3 was the circular economy, so hence my earlier comment that all 3 steps were being executed in parallel. The 3 steps neutral, this would be the first step in a fully circular economical process. This is possibly the holy grail, right? I know I'm here at an LPG World Conference, and some of you might be inclined to think that LPG is the holy grail. I beg to differ, with due apologies. We in this country currently challenged with having to wean off the natural gas that we've exploited for 50 odd years, do believe that hydrogen is possibly one of the most important solutions to get to the carbon neutral situation. And currently we already produce a lot of grey hydrogen in the port area because that's used as part of the manufacturing processes. We just offered and completed a detailed framework study how blue hydrogen could be produced, and basically that's flue gases and natural gas producing hydrogen and capturing the carbon that is emitted as part of the process, and that carbon then will be used and also stored through that previous example I just gave. Blue hydrogen would be a perfect stepping stone to get to the green hydrogen economy. And the green hydrogen is the project to the right, where we have a project with BP and with Nourion to build the biggest electrolyzer facility in the world, 250 megawatts of green hydrogen. Now, why not skip the step of blue hydrogen and go immediately to green hydrogen? That's because in this country, in the merit order of steps to take, so to speak, we should first produce enough green electrons through wind offshore to be able to phase out our current gas-fired and coal-fired power plants. If we are successful, and there's a big if, because we have to ramp up our rollout of the offshore wind facilities significantly, we should be able to achieve that weaning off the gas and the coal by 2030. Until such time, it's of course doesn't make sense, economically speaking, to use your green hydrogen in your chemical processes and leave the coal-fired power plants burning longer. So in the order of things, it makes sense to first produce enough green electrons, switch from fossil fuel electricity generation to renewable generation. In the meantime, produce the blue hydrogen with the carbon capture and storage, so you have the infrastructure ready, and you start testing, researching how you could use the hydrogen in your facilities from a storage perspective, from a supply half-fabricate perspective, and then once ready, you move to the green hydrogen. These are big projects, ladies and gentlemen. This is big-size stuff, because the biggest plant that we're currently considering in the world, 250 megawatts. In order to move the entire port area to a sustainable footing, we would need 40 of those, 40. So it's not that we are pleased and satisfied and complacent Once we have one, unfortunately, we need 40. That's the size of the footprint that we are accountable and responsible for. Now, let me wrap up, also with an eye on the clock, by trying to create the link with your challenge and your role in life. Because this is specifically transportation, and I'm very aware, because I've worked in India, I've worked in Pakistan, I've worked in Vietnam, I've worked in Venezuela, I've worked in Bangladesh. I'm very aware of your role of LPG, of the role of LPG in the cooking oil and the heating environment in those areas, and also in the rural areas, even in Europe. Very much aware. But I've read your position paper coming into the conference because I wanted to know what really was top of mind. And what struck me in the position paper is that you kind of stop to say, well, we could have a better profile than the heating oil environment, but you didn't go as far as to say, and this is what it will take to get it to a zero profile, zero emission profile. And I'm a strong believer that if you do not identify yourselves on these pathways where the top right-hand corner actually is zero emission, if you cannot find how you can actually contribute to getting to the zero emission, you ought to go back to the drawing board. You ought to try and force your way into those pathways, whether it's electrification we're on, whether it's hydrogen we're on, whether it's synthetic fuels we're on. LPG is not on there. And there's a reason for it, because we haven't seen, with due respect, enough of the LPG market into leading to a zero-emission profile environment. We're blessed in Rotterdam that we have a large bio-LPG facility by Neste. 40,000 tons of bio-LPGs produced as a direct supply contract with SHV, for which we're eternally grateful that we have that facility in the port. But the challenge is, ladies and gentlemen, to move from that capability to where is our position in 2050 when we have to meet the zero-emission challenge and targets. With that, I thought I'd leave you with those thoughts, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Allard. I think that's a very interesting walkthrough, particularly what some of the challenges are when you're thinking about LPG from the infrastructure perspective. I think we have time for one short question before we go to the panel. Does anyone have a quick question for Allard? No? Okay, let's move right on to the panel. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. So we're now going to move on to the supply in transportation.